The rain drummed against my bedroom window, each drop a tiny explosion in the otherwise silent night. At exactly 3:45 a.m., my phone rang, its harsh electronic chirp cutting through the darkness like a knife. I hadn't slept. I rarely did anymore, not since the Bellwood case 3 months ago. Some cases leave scars that never heal, but what was about to unfold would make Bellwood look like a children's bedtime story. James Cooper speaking, I answered, my voice rough from too many cigarettes and too little sleep. Mr. Cooper, the voice was feminine, cultured, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Your services are required. A car will arrive in 20 minutes. Before I could protest, the line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, listening to the dead air, wondering if I should just ignore the call and try to get some sleep. But curiosity has always been my weakness, that, and the fact that my bank account was running on fumes. Exactly 20 minutes later, a black luxury sedan pulled up outside my building. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched as a woman emerged, her silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the glow of the streetlights. Her dark suit looked expensive, perfectly tailored and completely impervious to the rain somehow. When I opened my door, she was already standing there, not a hair out of place. Mr. Cooper, she said, extending a manila envelope. My employers have need of your particular expertise. I took the envelope, noting its weight. And your employers would be? That's on a need-to-know basis, she replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. What you need to know is in that envelope. Review it. A car will pick you up at 7 a.m. Inside the envelope, I found photographs, reports, and a single sheet of paper with coordinates to a city called Ravenwood in the Pacific Northwest. The photos showed missing persons, dozens of them, but these weren't your typical missing persons cases. Each photo was accompanied by a last seen image, usually from security cameras. In each one, the subject looked wrong. Their movements were unnatural, their expressions vacant. The final page contained my payment details. The number made me blink twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. This kind of money meant one thing. Whatever was happening in Ravenwood, it was bad, really bad. By sunrise, I had packed my bags and was waiting outside my building. The same black sedan appeared, but this time with a different driver. The elegant woman was nowhere to be seen. The drive to the airport was silent, and before I knew it, I was on a private jet headed to Ravenwood. I spent the flight reviewing the files again. People had been disappearing in Ravenwood for the past 6 months. Not just disappearing, changing. The few who had been found alive were different. Medical reports described extreme personality changes, memory loss, and bizarre behavioral patterns. One man was found speaking backwards, another could only walk sideways. The official explanation was mass hysteria, but I knew better. Mass hysteria doesn't leave physical evidence, and these cases had plenty. The plane landed at a small private airfield outside Ravenwood. As I stepped onto the tarmac, the air felt heavy, charged somehow, like the moment before a lightning strike. The city sprawled before me, its skyline partially obscured by low-hanging clouds. Nothing about it looked unusual from here, but I could feel it. That same instinct that had kept me alive through countless investigations. Something was very wrong in Ravenwood. A police detective named Rachel Morgan met me at the airfield. She was tall, with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Mr. Cooper, she said, extending her hand. Welcome to Ravenwood, though I wish you were here under better circumstances. Call me James, I replied, shaking her hand. And better circumstances rarely require my services, Detective Morgan. Rachel, she corrected. And isn't that the truth? Come on, I'll show you what we're dealing with. The drive into Ravenwood was an exercise in subtle wrongness. At first glance, everything looked normal. Typical Pacific Northwest architecture, rain-slicked streets, people going about their business. But as we drove deeper into the city, I started noticing things. The streetlights flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Shadows fell at impossible angles. And the people, some of them moved like marionettes with tangled strings. It started 6 months ago, Rachel explained as we drove. Just a few missing persons cases at first. Nothing unusual for a city this size, but then they started coming back. The ones in the reports, I said. She nodded. They were different. Not just personality changes or trauma. It was like they were different people wearing the same skin, and then more people started disappearing. We pulled up to the police station, a granite and glass building that looked like it had seen better days. Inside, Rachel led me to a small conference room that had been converted into an incident command center. The walls were covered with photos, maps, and strings connecting various events. "This is everything we have," she said, gesturing to the wall. "But I'll be honest with you, James. We're out of our depth here. Whatever's happening, it's not anything we're equipped to handle." I studied the wall, taking in the patterns. The disappearances had started in the industrial district, near an abandoned research facility. From there, they had spread outward like a virus, following no logical pattern except they all seemed to spiral around that original location. "Tell me about the research facility," I said, tapping the photo of an imposing concrete building surrounded by chain link fence. Rachel's expression darkened. Officially, it was a private research and development center owned by a company called Horizon Industries. They shut down operations about a year ago, citing budget cuts, but... She pulled out a file from her desk. I did some digging. In the months before they closed, their power consumption was off the charts. They were running something big in there. Any idea what? None of their former employees will talk. The ones we can find, anyway. Most of them disappeared right after the shutdown. The rest, she shook her head. Let's just say they're not in any condition to answer questions. A knock at the door interrupted us. A young officer stood there, his face pale. "Detective Morgan. We've got another one. Living this time." We followed him to the hospital, where doctors had isolated the latest victim in a secure ward. Through the observation window, I could see a middle-aged man sitting perfectly still on his bed. His name was Peter Aldrich, according to his chart. He had been missing for 3 weeks. He was found wandering in Pioneer Park, the doctor explained. A couple out walking their dog found him. He hasn't moved from that position since we brought him in. I studied the man through the glass. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something none of us could see. His skin had a waxy, almost translucent quality to it. But what caught my attention was the way the shadows in his room behaved. They seemed to bend toward him, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. "Has he said anything?" I asked. The doctor hesitated. "Yes, but it doesn't make any sense. He keeps repeating the same phrase over and over. It wears us like clothes." I felt a chill run down my spine. In my line of work, you develop a sense for when things are about to go from bad to worse. Right now, that sense was screaming at me. "I need to talk to him," I said. The doctor started to protest, but Rachel cut him off. "Let him. He knows what he's doing." Inside the room, the air felt thick, almost syrupy. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their light seeming to stop a few feet short of where Peter sat. I pulled up a chair and sat across from him, just outside the radius of that strange darkness. "Peter," I said softly, "my name is James Cooper. I'm here to help." His head turned toward me with a movement too smooth to be natural. When his eyes met mine, I had to force myself not to recoil. His pupils had expanded to fill his entire iris, leaving nothing but bottomless black pools. "You can't help," he said, his voice carrying an echo that shouldn't have been possible in that small room. "It's already here. It's been here so long. We just couldn't see it before." "What is it, Peter? What's been here?" His face contorted in a smile that stretched too wide. "It came through the mirror they built. The one that shows what's on the other side. But they didn't understand. The mirror doesn't just show, it opens. And once it's open," his voice trailed off, and for a moment I swore I could see something moving behind his eyes. "What happens when it's open?" I pressed. Peter's head snapped back to face forward. "Everything comes through. Everything changes. We change. It changes us. Makes us ready." "Ready for what?" Instead of answering, he began to hum. The sound resonated at a frequency that made my teeth vibrate. The shadows in the room writhed like living things and the lights overhead began to flicker wildly. "We need to get out," I said, standing up. "Now." Rachel didn't argue. We barely made it to the door when Peter's humming reached a crescendo. The lights exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. When emergency power kicked in seconds later, Peter was gone. The bed where he had sat was empty, the sheets undisturbed, but on the wall behind it, something had been written in what looked like condensation. "The mirror never closes." I turned to Rachel, who was staring at the empty bed in horror. "I need everything you have on Horizon Industries, and I mean everything." She nodded, her face grim. "What just happened?" "I think," I said, watching as the condensation on the wall slowly evaporated. "We just got our first real look at what we're dealing with, and it's worse than anyone imagined." Back at the station, Rachel pulled every file they had on Horizon Industries. Most of it was mundane corporate paperwork, tax records, building permits, employment records. But buried in the stack, I found something interesting, a series of incident reports from the months before the facility shut down. "Look at this," I said, spreading the reports on the table. Multiple calls about power surges in the area, complaints about strange noises at night. And here, I tapped one report in particular, a 911 call from one of their security guards about seeing people walking through walls. The responding officers wrote it off as sleep deprivation, Rachel added, reading over my shoulder. "But look at the date, 3 days before the facility shut down." I checked my phone. It was already past midnight. The fluorescent lights of the station buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scattered papers. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind an unnatural silence. "We need to see that facility," I said. Rachel nodded. "I can get us in. Technically, it's still an active crime scene." The drive to Horizon Industries took us through the industrial district. At night, the abandoned warehouses and empty lots took on an otherworldly quality. The moon hung low and swollen in the sky, its light seeming to bend around certain buildings in ways that defied physics. The facility itself was a looming concrete monstrosity, its windows dark and empty. Chain link fence surrounded the property, topped with razor wire that gleamed dully in our headlights. The front gate hung partially open, its lock broken. "That's not right," Rachel said, drawing her weapon. "This was secured yesterday." We approached cautiously, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The front entrance was sealed with police tape, but inside, our lights revealed a lobby frozen in time. Papers still scattered across the reception desk, a half-empty coffee cup growing mold beside a dusty computer monitor. But something was wrong with the shadows. They didn't move quite right when our lights passed over them, as if they were a fraction of a second too slow to react. The research labs were in the basement, Rachel said, consulting the building plans. 2 levels down. The elevator was obviously out of service, so we took the stairs. Each step down felt like moving through invisible syrup, the air growing thicker and colder. By the time we reached the first basement level, my breath was coming out in visible puffs. "James," Rachel whispered, her flashlight beam trembling slightly. "Look at the walls." I swept my light across the concrete walls. At first, I didn't see it, but then, there, tiny ripples moved across the surface like waves on a pond. I reached out to touch one, but Rachel grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she warned. After what we saw with Peter, she was right. We continued down the corridor, passing empty offices and storage rooms. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, except... I paused, shining my light on the floor. There were footprints in the dust, fresh ones, leading toward the second stairwell. "Someone's been here," I muttered. "Recently." The footprints led us down to the second basement level. Here, the air felt different, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The corridor opened into a large chamber that must have been the main research lab. Banks of equipment lined the walls, their screens dark and dead. But at the center of the room, "My God," Rachel breathed. A massive circular frame dominated the chamber, at least 15 feet in diameter. Its surface was made of some kind of dark metal that seemed to absorb our flashlight beams. But what caught my attention was what was happening around it. The air itself appeared to be bending, creating a subtle distortion that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "This is it," I said. "This is what Peter was talking about. The mirror." Rachel approached one of the computer terminals. "Look at this. The power's still on." She pressed a key and the screen flickered to life. Files and folders filled the display, most of them corrupted or unreadable. But one video file remained intact, dated the day before the facility shut down. With trembling fingers, Rachel clicked play. The video showed this same room, but fully lit and operational. Scientists in white lab coats moved around the circular frame, checking readings on various instruments. A man with graying hair and round glasses stood in front of the camera, speaking directly to it. Final test of Project Mirror, October 15th. After 17 attempts, we've finally achieved stable resonance. Dr. Wells signing off. The camera continued to record as the scientists activated the frame. Energy crackled around its edges, and the air within began to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. Then something went wrong. The ripples turned violent, and the scientists began backing away. One of them was shouting, but the audio was too distorted to make out the words. That's when we saw it. At first, it looked like a darker patch within the rippling air, but then it moved. It flowed out of the frame like oil spreading across water, but it moved with purpose. The scientists tried to run, but the darkness reached them first. When it touched them, they just stopped, stood perfectly still, like mannequins. The last thing we saw before the video cut out was Dr. Wells turning to face the camera. His eyes had gone completely black, and his face was twisted in an impossible smile. "Found you," he said, but his voice wasn't human anymore. The screen went dark, leaving us in silence broken only by the hum of the computer fan. "James," Rachel said softly. The timestamp on that video, it wasn't just the day before the facility shut down, it was exactly 6 months ago. A cold weight settled in my stomach. When the disappearances started, a sound echoed through the chamber, footsteps coming from the corridor we'd entered through. Rachel drew her weapon while I pulled out the specialized gear I'd brought with me. It wasn't much, an electromagnetic pulse generator and a modified flashlight that emitted specific light frequencies, but it was better than nothing. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by a strange sliding sound, like something being dragged across concrete. Then a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Dr. Wells, or what was left of him. He walked with jerky, unnatural movements, as if his joints worked in different directions than they should. Behind him, his shadow stretched impossibly long, writhing like a living thing. "We've been waiting," he said, in that same inhuman voice from the video. "Waiting for someone who could understand, who could appreciate what we've achieved here." "What are you?" I demanded, aiming my modified flashlight at him. He smiled that terrible smile again. "We are change. We are what lies between spaces, between moments. Your kind built a door, thinking you could control what came through, but doors open both ways." Rachel's gun was trained on him, but her hands were shaking. "Stay back," she warned. Dr. Wells took another step forward, and I noticed something horrifying. His feet weren't touching the ground. He was floating about an inch above the floor, the air around him rippling like heat waves off hot asphalt. "Your weapons can't harm us," he said. "We exist in the spaces between existence, but we can harm you. We can change you, make you ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "For what comes next. The mirror never closes, Mr. Cooper. It's been opening wider every day, and soon, very soon, our world will merge with yours completely." As he spoke, the massive frame behind us began to hum. The air within it started to ripple, just like in the video, but this time, I could see something moving in those ripples, shapes that shouldn't exist, moving in ways that hurt to look at. "Run," I whispered to Rachel. "Run now." We bolted for the door, but Dr. Wells, or whatever was wearing his form, made no move to stop us. His laughter followed us down the corridor, echoing in ways that seemed to come from all directions at once. As we ran, the emergency lights began to flicker and die, plunging sections of the hallway into darkness. "The stairs," Rachel gasped, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. "We need to." She stopped mid-sentence. The stairwell we'd come down was gone. In its place was a solid wall, its surface rippling like the one we'd seen earlier. We turned to run the other way, but that corridor now ended in another rippling wall. It's changing the building, I said, pulling out my EMP generator. We need to find another way out. A sound filled the air, not quite a voice, not quite a scream, but something in between. The darkness at the end of the hall began to move, flowing toward us like a living tide. Within it, I could see faces forming and dissolving, mouths opening in silent screams. I activated the EMP generator. Blue-white energy crackled through the air, and the advancing darkness recoiled. The walls around us briefly stopped their rippling, becoming solid again. There, Rachel pointed to a door that had appeared in the previously solid wall. Emergency exit. We burst through the door into a stairwell I was certain hadn't been there before. The steps seemed to go up forever, vanishing into darkness above us. Behind us, that terrible sound grew louder, and I could feel the air growing thicker, harder to move through. Don't look back, I warned Rachel as we took the stairs 2 at a time. Whatever happens, don't look back. The stairwell began to twist as we climbed, the steps becoming steeper, the walls closing in. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but we couldn't stop. The darkness was rising below us like a flood. Finally, we reached a door marked with an exit sign. I slammed into it with my shoulder and we stumbled out into the lobby, but not the lobby we'd entered through. This one was different, wrong. The ceiling was too high, the proportions subtly off, and through the glass doors I could see the city of Ravenwood. But it wasn't our Ravenwood anymore. The sky was a color that shouldn't exist, and the buildings in the distance bent and swayed like trees in a wind we couldn't feel. People walked the streets, but their movements were jerky and unnatural, like poorly operated puppets. What's happening? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. The worlds are bleeding together, I realized. Just like he said, the mirror isn't just a door anymore. It's shattering the barrier between realities. A figure stepped out of the shadows near the reception desk. It was Peter Aldrich, the man from the hospital, but he wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the darkness. All the missing people from the case files, their eyes black and empty, their movements wrong in ways that defied description. "You understand now," they said in unison, their voices creating a discordant chorus. "Why we chose this place. Why we chose you." "Me," I managed to ask. Peter's face split in that too wide smile. "We've been watching you, James Cooper, ever since the Bellwood case. You see things others don't. You understand things others can't. You'll be perfect." The other figures began to move closer, their bodies twisting and changing as they advanced. Some grew taller, their limbs elongating impossibly. Others seemed to fold in on themselves, becoming denser, darker. I grabbed Rachel's arm. "The EMP generator might give us an opening. When I activate it, run for the door. Get to your car. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." I wasn't sure if that was a lie. The generator hummed to life in my hand, its energy making my skin tingle. The figures hesitated, their forms wavering like heat mirages. Rachel bolted for the door, and I followed, but something caught my ankle. I looked down to see a shadow wrapped around my leg, solid as a steel cable. The darkness began to crawl up my leg, cold as ice and burning like acid at the same time. I turned the EMP generator to maximum power, pressed it against the shadow, and activated it. The world exploded in blue-white light. The shadow released me with what felt like a scream inside my head, and I stumbled forward. Rachel had the door open, holding it as I ran through. The night air hit me like a physical force, but something was wrong with it. It felt too thick, almost liquid in my lungs. "The car," Rachel shouted, already running toward the parking lot. But the parking lot wasn't where we'd left it. Instead, the pavement stretched out endlessly in all directions, the yellow lines of parking spaces twisting into impossible patterns. Behind us, the doors of Horizon Industries burst open. The crowd of transformed humans poured out, their bodies morphing and changing as they moved. But now I could see what they really were, not just changed humans, but humans being worn like suits by something else. Through the tears in their reality, I caught glimpses of what lay beneath. Darkness given form, consciousness without shape. "This way." I grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her toward where I thought I saw her car. The air was getting thicker by the second, and each step felt like walking through deep water. The modified flashlight in my hand flickered and died. We reached the car, but the key wouldn't turn in the lock. Rachel swore and tried again. That's when I noticed the key was melting in her hand, dripping like mercury onto the pavement. "James," she whispered, staring past me. "Look." I turned. The city around us was changing. Buildings stretched and contracted like they were breathing. Streets folded in on themselves, creating impossible loops and spirals. And the sky was full of eyes. Peter's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You can't run from what's already here. We've been here all along, in every shadow, in every reflection. We just needed the right moment, the right person, to make everyone else see." The crowd of transformed humans had surrounded us now, moving in perfect synchronization. Their faces were melting, revealing the void beneath. Dr. Wells stepped forward, his form rippling like a heat mirage. "The process has already begun," he said, his voice resonating in frequencies that made my vision blur. The mirror was just the beginning. Now every reflection is a door, every shadow a gateway. Your world is joining with ours, piece by piece. I felt something wet on my face and reached up to touch it. My fingers came away red. My nose was bleeding. Rachel had fallen to her knees beside me, her hands pressed against her ears, blood trickling between her fingers. The world around us was dissolving. Reality peeled away like old wallpaper, revealing the writhing darkness beneath. Through the tears in space, I could see things moving, vast shapes that defied comprehension, beings that existed in dimensions beyond our understanding. "Why me?" I managed to ask, even as I felt consciousness slipping away. "Why choose me?" Dr. Wells knelt beside me, his face now a swirling void of darkness. "Because you're already halfway there, James. The Bellwood case, it changed you, opened your eyes, made you see things others couldn't. You just didn't realize what you were seeing." Memories of Bellwood flashed through my mind. The missing children, the strange lights, the sounds that couldn't exist. I'd solved the case, or thought I had, but now I understood. It hadn't been the end of something, it had been the beginning. "You'll help us show everyone else," Peter said, his voice joining the chorus of others. "Help us make them ready. The change is coming, James. The only choice is whether to lead it or be consumed by it." The darkness was closing in, and I could feel my grip on reality slipping. Rachel had gone quiet beside me, her eyes wide and unseeing. The last thing I saw before consciousness faded was my own reflection in a puddle on the ground. But it wasn't my face looking back at me, it was something else, something that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. I woke up to the sound of beeping monitors. The harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room buzzed overhead, but something about them seemed different. The light didn't fall quite right, creating shadows that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. "You're awake." The voice belonged to the elegant woman who had first given me this assignment. She sat in a chair by the window, looking exactly as she had that rainy night, but now I could see what I'd missed before. Her shadow didn't match her position, and sometimes it moved independently of her. "Rachel," I asked, my voice rough. "Detective Morgan is in intensive care. The doctors can't explain what happened to her. They're calling it a stroke, but we both know better." She stood, her movements too smooth to be natural. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." I tried to sit up, but my body felt wrong, like my skin didn't quite fit anymore. "The city, what's happening to Ravenwood?" "See for yourself." She pulled back the curtain. The city outside was still there, but it wasn't the same. Buildings stood where they always had, but they changed when you looked at them too long, their architecture shifting like living things. The streets below were full of people going about their daily routines, but their movements were too perfect, too coordinated. And the sky was still full of eyes, but now they looked like they belonged there. "Most people don't notice," the woman said. "Their minds aren't ready to see it yet. But you can, can't you? You can see how beautiful it is." "Beautiful isn't the word I'd use," I managed to say. "What are you, really?" She smiled, and for a moment, her face rippled like water. "I'm like you, James. Someone who saw too much, who understood too well. I made my choice 3 years ago, when they first came through. Now I help others make theirs." "The mirror," I said. "It wasn't the first one, was it?" There have been many doors throughout history, places where the barrier between worlds was thin. Horizon Industries just found a way to make one deliberately, but they couldn't control what came through, what had been waiting to come through for so long. I looked at my hands. In the fluorescent light, I could see through them slightly, like they were made of smoky glass. What's happening to me? You're changing, like I did, like everyone will, eventually. The process has already begun in Ravenwood. A test run, you might say. Soon it will spread to other cities, other countries. The old reality is breaking down, making way for something new. And what about the people who don't want to change? Her expression hardened slightly. Change doesn't require permission, James. It's inevitable. The only choice is whether to be part of shaping it or to be shaped by it. A nurse entered the room, but her movements were wrong, her smile too wide. Through her skin I could see darkness moving, flowing like liquid shadow. She checked my vital signs with hands that occasionally passed through the equipment rather than touching it. The others are waiting, the elegant woman said. Dr. Wells, Peter, all of them. They want to show you what's possible, what you could become, what you could help others become. I closed my eyes, but I could still see, not with my eyes, but with something else, something that had awakened inside me. I could see the currents of reality flowing around us, the places where it had grown thin and torn. I could see the things moving in between those tiers, vast and patient and hungry. And if I refuse, then you'll change anyway, but without purpose, without control. You'll become like the others, empty shells for them to wear, but you could be so much more. She held out her hand. In the space between us, reality rippled like heat waves off hot asphalt. Come with me, James. Let me show you what the world is becoming. I looked at her outstretched hand, seeing both the perfectly manicured fingers and the writhing darkness beneath them. In that moment, I thought of Rachel lying somewhere in this hospital, her mind broken from seeing too much. I thought of all the missing people, their families, the lives torn apart. And I thought of Bellwood, of the things I'd seen there that I'd tried so hard to forget. I took her hand. The world shifted. Reality peeled away like old film, revealing something vast and impossible beneath. The hospital room dissolved around us, and we were somewhere else, everywhere else, at once. I could see Ravenwood spread out below us, but not from any physical vantage point. We were seeing it from between spaces, from the angles that shouldn't exist. Beautiful, isn't it? She said, but her voice wasn't coming from her anymore. It resonated from the spaces around us, from the darkness itself. This is how they see our world, how you'll learn to see it. The city was a web of light and shadow, but not light as humans understand it. I could see the currents of reality flowing through the streets, pooling in some places, wearing thin in others, and the people. I could see through them now, see the truth of what they were becoming. Not everyone is changing the same way, I observed, watching the patterns of transformation ripple through the population. No, some resist, their minds too rigid to accept the new reality. They break instead of bending. Others are like you, special, ready to become something more. She guided me through the spaces between spaces, showing me things that defied description. I saw the true form of the entities that had come through the mirror, vast, ancient intelligences that existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension. They weren't malevolent, not exactly, they were simply inevitable. Why now? I asked. Why this moment in history? Humanity is at a tipping point, she explained. Your technology, your understanding of reality has brought you to the edge of a great change. We're simply accelerating the process, guiding it. We passed through what had been the Horizon Industries building. The mirror device was still there, but I could see it properly now. It wasn't just a doorway, it was a wound in reality, bleeding other dimensions into ours. And it was growing. The mirror was never meant to be controlled, she continued. The scientists who built it thought they could contain what came through, study it, use it. They didn't understand that they were just instruments themselves, playing their part in a much larger transformation. We moved through the city's shadows, and I saw others like us, former humans who had embraced the change, learning to exist in the spaces between conventional reality. Some I recognized from the case files, others were new. All of them were becoming something else, something more. But then I saw something that made me pause. In a small apartment, a family sat down to dinner. They couldn't see the changes happening around them, couldn't see how reality was unraveling at the edges of their perception. Their normality was like a bubble of old reality, fragile but persisting. They can't stay that way forever, the woman said, sensing my thoughts. The change will reach them eventually, but they don't have to break. You could help them, James. Help them understand. Help them adapt. And those who can't adapt, everything has its price. Evolution requires sacrifice. We passed through the hospital again, and I saw Rachel's room. She lay still, machines beeping around her, but I could see something else now. Her mind wasn't broken. It was changing, fighting against the transformation. Her consciousness flickered like a candle in a windstorm. I can save her, the woman said. Show you how to guide her through the change. But you have to fully commit. No more doubts, no more looking back. I moved closer to Rachel's bed, seeing both her physical form and the turbulent reality surrounding her. She was strong, stronger than they'd anticipated. That's why she hadn't simply broken like so many others. She could survive this, become like us, but only with help. I reached out, my hand passing through the conventional space between us, and touched her mind directly. In that moment, I made my real choice, not for myself, but for everyone caught in this transformation. If change was inevitable, then someone needed to understand it. Someone needed to remember what it meant to be human. Show me, I said to the woman. Show me everything. Her smile widened, revealing the void behind it. Welcome to the next stage of evolution, James. Let's begin. The next few days, if they could even be called days anymore, were a journey into understanding that broke and rebuilt my mind repeatedly. I learned to move through the spaces between moments, to see the currents of reality as clearly as I once saw physical objects. The elegant woman, who finally told me to call her Eleanor, taught me to navigate this new existence. Reality, she explained as we moved through the shadow of a skyscraper, isn't fixed. It's more like a consensus. Humans agreed on a certain way of perceiving things, and that agreement became their prison. We're breaking those chains. I watched as she demonstrated, reaching into the fabric of space and pulling it aside like a curtain. Behind it, I saw other versions of the same street, possibilities that had never been realized, realities that had been forgotten. But it wasn't all abstract learning. There were others to help, to guide through the change. I started with Rachel, using my new understanding to ease her transformation. It took what felt like weeks, though time had become a fluid concept. I stayed with her, helping her mind adapt to seeing beyond the conventional boundaries of reality. When she finally opened her eyes, all of them, both physical and otherworldly, she looked at me with understanding. I remember you, she said, her voice echoing across multiple frequencies. You were trying to solve a mystery. I still am, I replied. Just a much bigger one now. Not everyone could be saved. I learned that lesson the hard way when we tried to help a group of people who'd been caught in a particularly thin area of reality. Their minds simply couldn't stretch far enough, and they broke instead of transforming. The sound of their breaking echoed through dimensions, a reminder of the cost of evolution. But there were successes too. Peter, who had terrified me in the hospital, became one of my closest allies. His earlier transformation had been chaotic, unguided. With help, he learned to balance between what he had been and what he was becoming. The others, I said to Eleanor one moment between moments, the ones who came through the mirror first. I want to meet them. She took me deeper than I'd ever gone, through layers of reality that made my newly expanded consciousness spin. We emerged in a place that wasn't a place, a confluence of possibilities where the original entities existed in their true form. They were vast, ancient, and utterly alien, not good or evil, but simply beyond such concepts. They showed me visions of other worlds they'd helped transform, civilizations that had evolved beyond the limitations of single-dimensional consciousness. Some had succeeded, others had failed spectacularly, their realities collapsing into chaos. Earth stands on a knife's edge, Eleanor translated, though the entities communicated in concepts rather than words. Too much awareness too quickly leads to collapse, too little leads to stagnation. We must find the balance. I thought of the family I'd seen earlier, still living in their bubble of normality. Not everyone at once, I suggested. We find the ones who are ready, like you found me. We help them change. They help others. A controlled transformation instead of a sudden break. The entity's approval rippled through reality itself. This was why they'd wanted me, not just to change, but to help shape the change. To remember enough of humanity to help build a bridge between what was and what would be. But even as I began to understand my role, I sensed something else. Beyond the entities we knew, in spaces even they rarely looked, something else was stirring. The mirror hadn't just opened a door for them, it had created cracks and foundations of reality that went deeper than anyone had imagined. I caught glimpses sometimes, in the deepest shadows between shadows, movements that made the entities themselves seem small, awareness that made their ancient intelligence feel young. Whatever lay in those depths, it was starting to notice our activities. I brought my concerns to Eleanor first. We stood in a fold of space overlooking Ravenwood, watching the transformation spread like ripples in a pond. The city had become a patchwork of realities, some areas almost entirely changed, others still clinging to the old way of existing. There's something else out there, I said, something deeper. Eleanor's form flickered, a sign of agitation I'd learned to recognize. We know, the entities know too, but they don't speak of it. Even they have their fears. What could beings like that possibly fear? Instead of answering directly, she showed me. We dove deeper into the spaces between spaces than I'd ever gone before. The familiar strangeness of the transformed reality fell away, replaced by something else, something older. Here, even the entity's influence felt thin, fragile. The mirror, Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper in the vastness, didn't just pierce the veil between our reality and theirs. It cracked something fundamental, something that was never meant to be disturbed. In the depths, I saw them, or rather, I sensed them. They made the entities we'd been working with look like children playing with toys. These were the original architects of reality itself, ancient beyond comprehension, and they were stirring from an eon-long slumber. The transformation, I realized with growing horror, it's not just changing our world, it's changing the foundations of reality itself. We're causing ripples in places we don't understand. Yes, Eleanor agreed, and they're beginning to notice. A presence brushed against my consciousness, not one of the entities we knew, but something else. Something vast and cold and utterly alien. For a moment, I experienced reality as it did. Saw the multiple dimensions we moved through as tiny, insignificant bubbles in an infinite ocean of possibility. We pulled back quickly, but not before I understood what was happening. The entities who'd come through the mirror were changing our reality, yes, but they were also refugees. They were running from something, trying to reshape our reality into a fortress against what lay beneath. Rachel was waiting when we returned to more familiar spaces. She'd grown powerful in her new form, her consciousness extending through multiple planes of reality simultaneously. You saw them, she said. It wasn't a question. The transformation, I said. It's not what we thought. Not entirely. No, Eleanor agreed. It's also a weapon, a way of hardening reality against what's trying to break through from below. The entities need us as much as we need them. That's when we felt it. A tremor in the deeper layers of reality. In the hospital, where much of the old reality still held sway, every mirror shattered simultaneously. The fragments showed not reflections, but glimpses of something moving in the depths. They're coming, Rachel whispered. Dr. Wells appeared beside us, his form barely holding its human shape. The barriers are weakening faster than we anticipated. The changes we're making, they're not happening quickly enough. How long do we have? I asked. Days, maybe, hours. Time is becoming unreliable. I looked out over Ravenwood, seeing all its layers simultaneously. The physical city, the transformed spaces, and now the cracks spreading through the foundations of reality itself. In the distance, the Horizon Industries building pulsed with energy as the original mirror continued to widen the breach. We need to accelerate the transformation, Eleanor said. A full conversion of the city might create enough altered reality to stabilize things, at least temporarily. That would break thousands of minds, I protested. Kill countless people who aren't ready for the change. Better broken than consumed, Dr. Wells said grimly. You haven't seen what lies below, what it does to untransformed consciousness." Another tremor shook reality, stronger this time. In the depths, something vast was stirring, reaching upward through layers of existence. The entities we'd been working with were gathering, their vast intelligences focused on the approaching threat. I felt the pressure of time, not linear time anymore, but something more complex, bearing down on us. In the streets below, people were beginning to sense that something was wrong. The carefully maintained illusion of normality was cracking. Dogs howled at things their owners couldn't see. Children pointed at the spaces between buildings where reality had worn thin, and the sky was beginning to fold in on itself. "There might be another way," I said, an idea forming. "The mirror device. It's still active, still drawing power." Rachel caught my thought before I could fully express it. "If we can't stop the transformation, we guide it. Use the mirror as a focus point." "More than that," Eleanor added, her form shifting as she processed the implications. "The mirror tears reality, but tears can be sewn back together." Dr. Wells moved through several spaces at once, his consciousness expanding as he examined the possibility. Yes, instead of fighting the transformation, we embrace it, but we direct it, shape it. "How many can we save?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be everyone. "Those who are already partially transformed," Eleanor said. "Those with potential, maybe a third of the city's population, if we're lucky. The rest..." Another tremor, stronger than before. In the hospital, patients were beginning to scream as their minds caught glimpses of what was rising from below. The entities moved through the city, gathering their strength, preparing for what was to come. "We need help," I said. "Everyone we've helped transform, everyone who can still think clearly enough to understand. We need them all." Rachel disappeared into the spaces between moments, spreading the word. Dr. Wells began making calculations that existed in more dimensions than I could follow. Eleanor and I moved through the city, marking safe zones where the transformation was strongest, where we might be able to shelter those we could save. They came from all over Ravenwood, the transformed ones, the ones we'd guided through the change. Some still wore mostly human forms, others had embraced their new nature completely. Peter led a group that had been hiding in the industrial district. Others emerged from the shadows between buildings, from the reflections in windows, from the static between radio stations. "The mirror," I explained to them. "It's our anchor point. We need to create a network, a web of transformed reality strong enough to resist what's coming. But more than that, we need to help it heal properly this time." "Like setting a broken bone," Peter observed, his form rippling with understanding. "Break it again to make it heal right." We felt it before we saw it, a vast consciousness pushing against the barriers of reality. In the depths, ancient eyes were opening. The entities showed us visions of what had happened to other realities that had fallen to these depths. Worlds turned inside out, civilizations unraveled to their component atoms, existence itself rewritten into forms that would drive any human mind to madness. "It's time," Eleanor said. We moved as one, hundreds of transformed consciousness working in harmony. The entities guided us, their ancient knowledge helping us weave a new pattern into reality itself. The mirror at Horizon Industries pulsed with power, but now we weren't fighting its effects. We were using them, directing them. The city began to change, not the chaotic transformation from before, but something more controlled, more purposeful. Buildings shed their concrete and steel, revealing structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The streets began to flow like liquid, carrying those who couldn't be saved to safe zones we'd created, pockets of old reality where they could exist unchanged, at least for now. But the entity from the depths was rising faster than we'd anticipated. Its consciousness brushed against our network, and I felt minds breaking under the pressure. Even some of the transformed ones couldn't handle contact with something so utterly alien, so completely beyond our understanding of existence. "Hold the pattern." Eleanor's voice resonated through multiple dimensions. "The network has to be complete before it breaks through." I felt Rachel's consciousness next to mine, her strength helping to stabilize the transforming reality around us. Together, we worked to weave the new pattern, using the mirror's power to reshape rather than simply break. The entities guided our efforts, their vast intelligence directing the flow of change. But something was wrong. The mirror's energy was becoming erratic, pulses of power that threatened to shatter what we were trying to build. I moved through the spaces between moments to the Horizon Industries building, Eleanor following close behind. The mirror device was transforming itself, the metal frame twisting into configurations that hurt to look at. Dr. Wells was there, his form barely holding together as he tried to control the machinery. "The containment field is failing," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "The original breach, it's widening on its own." Through the mirror, I could see it clearly now, a vast darkness that made the entities we knew seem like motes of dust in comparison. It was aware of us, aware of what we were trying to do, and it was amused. A voice that wasn't a voice filled every layer of reality simultaneously. "Your efforts are meaningless. All returns to the void." The mirror's frame began to crack, lines of pure darkness spreading outward like veins. Each crack released pulses of energy that tore holes in our carefully constructed network. In the city below, I could feel the safe zones beginning to collapse. "James," Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. "The pattern, it's not holding." I looked at Eleanor, saw the same realization in her multi-dimensional form. The plan wasn't working. The entity was too powerful, too vast for even our combined efforts to contain. That's when I understood what we had to do. "The mirror," I said. "It's not just a window or a door. It's a focus point, a lens." Eleanor grasped my meaning immediately. "If we can't keep it out, we direct it, like focusing sunlight through a magnifying glass." Dr. Wells's form stabilized slightly as he processed the idea. Yes, instead of trying to resist its power. "We channel it," I finished, "through the mirror, through our network, but not to break reality. To reshape it completely," Eleanor breathed. "But the cost?" Another tremor shook all layers of existence. In the depths, the entity was rising faster now, its vast consciousness beginning to eclipse everything else. Our time was running out. I reached out to Rachel, to Peter, to all the others who had transformed. Their understanding flowed back to me. They knew what I was suggesting, knew what it would cost, but they also knew it was our only chance. "Everyone who can still move," I sent through the network. "Get as many of the unchanged to the safe zones as you can. We don't have much time." "And those of us who stay?" Peter asked, though he already knew the answer. "We become the conduits, the anchor points. We take its power and use it to forge something new." The entity's presence pressed closer, its vastness threatening to overwhelm everything we'd built. But now we weren't trying to stop it. Instead, we began to construct something different. Not a barrier, but a framework. A skeleton of transformed reality that could channel the entity's power rather than break under it. Dr. Wells worked with the mirror's machinery, altering its configuration to serve our new purpose. Eleanor moved through the spaces between, strengthening key points in our network. Rachel coordinated the evacuation efforts, helping to save as many unchanged humans as possible. And I stood at the center of it all, where all the lines of power converged. The mirror hummed with energy, its surface now showing not reflections but the true face of what was coming. A darkness older than time, vast beyond comprehension. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked, her form steady beside me. I looked out over Ravenwood one last time, seeing all its layers at once. What it had been, what it was becoming, what it might yet be. "No," I answered honestly, "but it's time." We began the process. The mirror's surface rippled like liquid mercury as Dr. Wells made the final adjustments. Around us, the transformed ones took their positions, anchor points in a pattern that stretched across multiple dimensions. Eleanor and Rachel stood at key nodes, their consciousness expanded to help channel what was coming. The entity's presence filled every layer of reality now, its vast awareness pressed against the boundaries of existence, and through the mirror I could see its true form, an endless void that contained everything and nothing, a darkness that was alive and aware and hungry. "Your resistance is futile." It spoke through every surface, every shadow, every moment of time simultaneously. "All paths lead to dissolution." But we weren't resisting anymore. As its power began to pour through the mirror, we directed it, shaped it. The agony was indescribable. Imagine every cell in your body being unmade and remade simultaneously, every moment stretching into eternity. I felt others breaking around me, their consciousness scattered across dimensions. Peter was the first to go, his form dissolving into pure energy that we used to strengthen the pattern. Others followed, their sacrifice becoming part of the framework we were building. Through it all, Eleanor's presence remained steady, her consciousness intertwined with mine as we worked to channel the entity's power. Rachel coordinated the remaining transformed ones, maintaining the pattern even as reality buckled and warped around us. The entity realized too late what we were doing. Its power, meant to unmake our reality, was being used to forge something new, a hybrid existence that could sustain both the changed and unchanged. Not a barrier between realities, but a bridge. Now, I called out, my voice resonating across all frequencies of existence. Dr. Wells activated the modified mirror device one final time. The entity's power, channeled through our network, focused through the mirror like a lens, began to crystallize reality itself, not into something rigid and unchanging, but into something fluid, adaptable, able to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt my consciousness being pulled apart, stretched across dimensions, becoming part of the new framework of reality itself. Eleanor's presence began to fade, her energy becoming part of the pattern. Rachel's consciousness flickered and dispersed, joining with the new structure we were creating. In my last moments of individual awareness, I saw what we had made. Ravenwood still existed, but not as a single city anymore. It had become a nexus point, a place where multiple layers of reality overlapped and coexisted. The unchanged humans would still see their normal world, but the transformed ones could move freely through all layers. And the entity's power had become part of the structure itself, its vast consciousness bound into the framework we had created. Not destroyed or banished, but transformed, just as we had been transformed. My last human thought was of the elegant woman who had first given me this assignment. I understood now that she had known this might happen, had been guiding things toward this moment all along. The change couldn't be stopped, but it could be shaped, directed, turned into something that might let humanity survive and evolve. Then my individual consciousness dissolved, becoming part of something larger. I still exist in a way. I am part of the pattern now, part of the new reality we created. Sometimes, in quiet moments between moments, I can still perceive individual events. A child seeing through the veil for the first time, a mind awakening to the larger reality, the slow but steady evolution of human consciousness. The mirror still stands in the Horizon Industries building, but it's different now. It doesn't reflect what is, or even what might be. Instead, it shows the truth. That reality is not fixed, not singular, but endless in its possibilities. And in the depths beyond it, the entity remains, no longer a threat but a part of the new existence we forged. The change continues, spreading slowly outward from Ravenwood, but now it's controlled, guided by the pattern we created with our sacrifice. Some will break, some will adapt, some will transform, but humanity will survive, evolve, become something new. And I will be here, watching, part of the endless dance of realities we created that night when we chose to reshape existence itself rather than let it be unmade. In the end, it wasn't about stopping the inevitable. It was about choosing how to face it, how to change with it, how to make something new from the ashes of what was lost. After all, that's what evolution is all about.